Hello, everybody. Welcome back to My Animated Life with your host, Declan Mangan. In this podcast, oh, wait, hold on. I screwed it up. But for me, your host, Declan Mangan, I am a senior graduating with a filmmaking degree with the hopes of getting into the animation career. In this podcast, we talk about animation of a wide variety through news, movies, TV, just really anything relating to the topic. And sometimes, like this very special moment, we have a special guest. And that special guest today is Marcelo, tell me if I'm saying this right, Vignali.
Vignali.
Vignali. All right, thank you. Can you give us a little brief history of who you are? Just like some stuff you've worked on and your main primary focus in the industry is?
Yeah, when I was going to art school, one of the things I wanted to be is I just wanted to be like a painter. I wanted to be a great painter.
Right.
And then the uh, but a childhood desire that I had was to work in animation. That was all my focus was on. When I went to school, the industry of animation had disintegrated. It
Mm.
was pretty much gone. This would have been sort of like the mid 80s. So Hanna-Barbera had already contracted to the point I think they were only doing like, one or two shows. I think it was basically like Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo. The Warner Brothers had stopped making animation. Disney was in the midst of being chopped up and sold. Filmation would be going out of business a few years later. UPA was already gone. So animation was completely gone. But as I finished art school and I had trained to be an illustrator, the opportunity came up to go work at an animation studio. And but this animation studio was different. It was DIC Entertainment, and what they were doing is that we're doing all of the designs and everything here in the U.S. and they were shipping all of that abroad. And I thought, like, well, it's not quite how I imagined the animation industry, but it's what I love to do. It's what I wanted to be a part of ever since I was a little kid. So this idea of being an illustrator and doing all these paintings I was going to have to take a back seat because this was an opportunity to work in animation. So that's what I did. And just when I got into the business, it was in 1987. The in 1988, the Roger Rabbit film comes out. In 1989, The Little Mermaid comes out, and the trajectory for animation just takes off. And at that point, I've just been, it was very fortuitous, and also because I was stubborn. It was something that I wanted to do, and I was gonna try and make that happen. That
Right.
the opportunity came up, and I found myself at the right place at the right time with the right portfolio. I mean, I had drawings and paintings and things like that. In when I was working as an illustrator, one of the things I wanted my illustration style to be was very was very animation like. It was very it was actually oriented to that sort of genre, family entertainment, animation, kind of like the traditional Disney kind of stuff. And so when the opportunity um, suddenly came out of nowhere in animation, my portfolio had acrylic paintings with designs that looked very animation like. My drawings were very animation like. And like I said, I found myself the right place at the right time, and it just took off from then. So I worked on a whole bunch of shows over at DIC Entertainment. It was the Alf and Alf Tales, Captain Nintendo, Cops. It was just a whole slurry of things for them. And then I left and I had an opportunity to go and work at Walt Disney Imagineering, use my skills to do that, to work on a whole series of projects on it. So I worked on Toontown for them. And so I was at
Huh.
5.5 years over there developing theme park design, Toontown, I was one of four principal concept designers for Toontown, helping to create that land, that attraction, and then also working on the Roger Rabbit ride. I was the lead designer for that. then opportunities, but I still wanted to work in animation. Again, it goes back to being stubborn. You got a vision about something, you got to stick with it. And so I left and I went back to animation. And all my friends in theme park design, they're like, "What are you doing? This is crazy. Why would you leave theme park design? You're already an art director in theme park design. You've got all of this experience. I had this big giant office, and it was overlooking the model shop." And it's like, nope. I traded it all to go work in a cubicle to get a chance to work with someone who I thought was going to take my career to the next level. And this is Hans Bacher, and he certainly did that. Hans Bacher, and he was the art director for Mulan,
Right.
and that show, it was a tremendous opportunity to work on those. It was sort of like the second run that Disney had at this classical 2D era.
The
The
Renaissance
beginning
point.
started with Pinocchio, um, or Snow White, I should say, and they ran all the way through those classics up until Snow White, and then it transitioned to a different, or I'm sorry, to Sleeping Beauty. Then it transitioned into a different period where they were doing much more experimental sort of stuff,
Yeah.
and then that just started losing steam and energy. But then it picked back up uh, when the Little Mermaid happened,
Yep.
and so I was able to get in on that starting with Mulan, and I worked on about 7 different pictures with them, Lilo and Stitch and Brother Bear, and then from then on, then the animation industry collapsed again, and it was gone, right? The 2D animation industry, and then it was rebuilt with a CG animation. And so those people who were older, more experienced than me, they simply retired. And
Mhm.
but I found myself in the position where I had already made my bones in 2D animation, but I needed to adapt. And so I adapted and I took those skills and I brought it to Sony Pictures Animation. I stayed with them for about 16 years,
Hmm.
working on everything from Open Season, Surf's Up, Hotel Transylvania, um, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, all the way up until Into the Spider-Verse. And actually, I even did some development on Goat, which
Oh,
it just was
nice.
released. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I left. I went to go basically restructure the development process at at Disney Television, restructure all of their development, um, and I hired the team, trained the team, and we worked on a series of different shows for Disney Television. And then after COVID, that again that fell apart, and then I started working at. I was bouncing around a couple other studios, and I was working some independent animation houses, production houses. Then I went to DreamWorks, and I worked on a feature over there, and I've been freelancing ever since.
Wow. That's a
It's
really the very long history. That's why I'm so interested in having you on board cuz like I've had Stefan Anderson of Meet the Robinsons on here. Another really storied, talented artist. I've also had Talia Perper who helped me get ready for Lightbox, and her career is just getting started. So it's always good to have, and then also Nico Colo Leo, creator of Ollie and Scoops. But it's so interesting to have all these different people that are still in the industry, are considered legends, and just people that are kind of getting started. And that's kind of what the show is about. It's like just highlighting everyone in the industry's career so far, and it's always just great to have you on. So we're gonna get started with some questions. You kind of already
okay.
answered question one a little bit about what made you want to go into animation, but what was your first encounter with animation that made you want to just be like, I want to do this?
Well, that was when I was a little kid. My mom took us to go see Fantasia, and so I
Uh,
actually did. I tried to find out when Fantasia was re-released, and so that would have put me at about 4 years old. And so the I saw that film and it did everything to me. It made me laugh, it made me cry. I was terrified. I was in awe and wonder. I mean, it just seemed to do everything to me. And from then on, that was it. I had been bitten by the animation bug, and that's all I wanted to do. I only wanted to watch cartoons. There was no internet, so you'd had to wait for the cartoons to come on. And I had a pad and paper, and I would sit and try to draw the cartoons. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
I remember one time
yeah.
my mom had bought us she had bought this Looney Tunes bed covers and pillowcases and stuff. And so I remember I told my brother and I said, Daffy Duck looks okay, but Bugs Bunny's wrong. And then he was like, what are you talking about? Right. And I got a piece of paper out and I drew what, um, how to fix it. Right. So even back as a little kid, and my brother, he laughs and he thinks about that, even out of my mind that I could remember what it's supposed to look like because I'd already drawn it to be explained to my brother why that bed sheet was not on model.
That's very funny. Yeah, especially since you're a character designer and you're like always creating things for like visuals and whatnot. But speaking of like your first visual stuff, like you mentioned it, you've worked on. This is kind of a double hander, but we'll start with the early era of your history, which is working with DIC on these Saturday morning cartoons like Alf and Captain N. Those are very, from what I've researched, they are very like strict timeline. It follows similar like character designs. But what I'm interested in is it's like how different was the work timeline for like a Saturday morning cartoon show that you've worked on? Were there sorts of limitations to designing certain characters to these shows, and how'd you get to that area too? I'm just curious.
Well, there was a guy, we're still very good friends. His name is Dave Carroll. And we were all going to art school together over at Otis. At the time, it was called Otis Parsons, and he graduated a year before us, and so he was out in the cruel, cruel world, and we were still me and our class were still doing art, at the school, and he came by to visit with us, and when he came by, he said, and we were getting ready to graduate, and he said, they're looking for people over at DIC Entertainment for those people who can draw. And I said, so me and a friend of mine, Paul Wee, who also is well known in the industry, he ended up, uh, we I think, I think we both went over together, or either I drove him over, and so we both showed our portfolios, and we both got hired. And from then on, that's how we got into the industry. And but it was a sweatshop. So you have to think that
Oh,
places like Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers, these were union studios. Now all of the union studios ended up going belly up,
right.
and this was not a union studio, and so a lot of the rules didn't really apply, and so it was considered a sweatshop. But it was a place where um, a lot of people were taking chances because they wouldn't hire a lot of animation people. They were hiring people that were outside of that. So they were hiring illustrators and painters and whoever they thought could do the work. So when uh, we ended up having a really fantastic crew that was uh, that was really brought together by Richard Reynes, and Richard Reynes went on to become a really well known producer. But he had this idea about animation not following the sort of cookie cutter mold. We
Right.
weren't going to
Yeah.
draw like Hanna-Barbera. We weren't going to draw like Warner Brothers. We were going to do our own thing. And as a result of that, those shows were very different, and they were very unique. They were very original, and they were very creative. And we ended up creating, I think, we ended up getting a lot of movement out of that that studio with the kind of work that we were doing. But when you think of the kind of work that was being created, you think about, well, who was on that crew? So, like I said, you had Dave Carroll, who was doing color, still working in the industry, very, very well known. You had Paul Wee, who was also, still working in the industry, very well known. As a very well known illustrator, Dan Kornstrom. We ended up working with Richie Chavez. He was just a couple of years older than us, but we held him in this tremendous esteem because he was older than us. He should know what he's doing. But he was unbelievably creative. He ended up driving a lot of the inception of a lot of studios. He helped Disney with their development as they were becoming um, more artistic in sort of like their experimentation of things. And he was part of that. He ended up helping do that over at DreamWorks as well when they were getting started. So he's been sort of like this seminal person that has sort of influenced the entire industry. We had Phil Barlow, who had this tremendous comic book called Zooniverse that they had brought on board to do designs because of his unique style. John Calmette with his paintings. It's John Calmette, Kevin Altieri, Dan Reba. All of these guys ended up working um, with Bruce Timm because this big
Wow.
chunk of this group ended up going over to work with Bruce Timm when they were doing Batman. At this point, I had broken off from that group and I went to go work at Imagineering. But that was the same group that once the whole thing at DIC sort of dissolved. And then everyone ended up over at Warner Brothers when Warner Brothers tried to get their animation started. And then they brought in this incredible team of unbelievable artists. But yeah, Paul Felix was a part of that as well. He ended up is very well known in the industry. Um, and Yeah, Ted Blackman also came out of DIC Entertainment. I mean, there was a whole slew of us that came out of that. It was really a wonderful place because it was sort of like an extension of school.
Yeah.
Everybody had that sort of, that there was a camaraderie there. There. We didn't really have the boundaries that you had at a union studio, where if you're a union studio, you do layout, you just do layout. Whereas, like when I was at DIC, I was doing everything. I was doing layout, storyboard cleanup, color. I was doing character design, and I was painting backgrounds in the evenings. So I was doing a little bit of everything, and that really did help me sort of develop to become much more rounded artist in the industry.
Yeah, actually, that is a really good question leading towards this isn't a question on my question card, but it is just popped in my head. So yeah, you are technically like you do a lot of animation and whatnot, but your main primary focus is like painting and art. What's kind of like the coalition behind it? Because it kind of is in the same area of it, where it's like one is, both of them require a lot of like creative vision, and it's like, yeah. What do you think, like painters and artists can put into something as crazy as this medium?
Yeah, when I think part of what really helped me was was something that actually created a lot of frustration for me. When I was going to art school, it was sort of the dark ages of art school. I hate to say that. But one of the things that they didn't really have much structure. So if you wanted to learn to paint, it's like, yeah, just paint whatever and paint abstract. And so there was this big push to do things that were non-representational, but that wasn't me. So I kept wanting to put this sort of like representational thing in it. But they kept, and for that there was a lot of consternation, with my teachers. They were very frustrated with me because I just wouldn't comply. And again, it goes back to being, stubborn,
Yeah.
and because I had this idea about who I wanted to be and the kind of art I wanted to create. But but as a result of that, there wasn't really much structure in my education, as probably a lot of people are frustrated. You're thinking like, wow, I don't have structure in my education. I know I hear all these different art students are all frustrated with that. But part of what ended up happening because I didn't have structure, that it forced me to reinvent myself in whatever it is I needed to do. So if I was working on Mulan and we had to research the Tang Dynasty in order to create artwork that looked like it was in that style, that's what I did. if we were trying to do the Into the Spider-Verse and we're trying to create that style and go with this comic book look,
Right, right.
that's what I did, and so like I adapted myself to that. So I became much more of a student of understanding the process rather than becoming a student of the process itself. And as a result of that, that helped me sort of evolve. One of the things that you have, like if I had fulfilled my goal when I went to art school and I simply wanted to be a great painter and I taught myself how to, or I was taught how to paint and I simply painted, then it would be very hard for me to break out of that mold. But what happened was that because I had to sort of build some of this stuff on my own, I gave myself the skills to do that, how to pay attention, how to dissect something. The teachers weren't telling me how to do it. So I had to look at something. Well, how did they figure that out? And my dear friend Paul, we would go to art shows and we would look at paintings. And so the paintings here like this, and we'd sit there and try to look at the glare on it in order to figure out which layers came first. And then we would go back home and we would try that out. And so there was a big process in my development as an artist, which was uh, around figuring things out. How do you make this? How do you build this? How what are the essential elements of design? Why does that work and that doesn't work? Why does this communicate and that doesn't communicate? And one of the teachers that I had, he wasn't a technician, so he wasn't going to teach you exactly how to do things, but he was fantastic at teaching you how to think. And his name was Everett Peck, and he was wonderful in that regard. And so I think that I took that process of thinking into my professional career. And so everything that I do, I always approach it from the a level of discovery. So I don't approach it with I simply just apply myself to it. No, I think that every project is unique and every project has a unique story it's trying to tell. So it doesn't make any sense for me to simply apply my layer of uh, how I want to represent this. What I do is I actually do the inverse, and that's why, like when you look at my work, it's very diverse. From
Yeah.
something like ALF or Captain Nintendo to Mulan to Into the Spider-Verse or to Surfs Up. When you think of like it's really varied because I think that each project is unique, and it's our responsibility as artists to reach into that message and find out what is the best way to express that message. And that's what I've done with my career. So I think that, in that regard, Everett Peck, even though he didn't really teach us, specific technique, he was fantastic in teaching us how to think about things, how to problem solve. And I took that and I've been carrying it throughout my entire career.
That is really interesting to think about. That you didn't learn this stuff, but you learned it on the job, and it's like that is something that is generally something someone would learn in the field. Like again, I am going into like live action filmmaking, but like I'm learning character design through my own like time as a drawer, getting into drawing or like just watching animation, like watching Goat was like I was just looking at how the locations were made and also like how different each character uses their animalistic instincts for basketball, and it's like that's kind of stuff like a normal audience member won't pick up. It's something like a someone who's very interested in art picks up on. It's like, hey, look at that. They're using like an ostrich's like interest in digging itself a hole, and it's like flying. It's like, oh, that's so cool. That it's so genius. And it's really cool to think about like how when you're out of college, you don't have to stop learning, and you can even learn on the job. That is something really cool to find out.
It was when I was actually that's one of the things I did was after I finished art school, I felt like my education was so inadequate
Oh yeah.
that, that I started going to figure drawing classes and I just started to draw the figure. And I thought like, well, every great artist, because that was my focus was to be great at creating artwork. And every great artist had drawn from the figure, and it didn't matter if it was, someone like Pablo Picasso, who was creating things that were very abstract, or
Yeah,
somebody creating something with a lot of realism, let's say like a Rembrandt, right? So everyone was going back to the figure and drawing that till they understood it. And I thought, like, well, I don't know where to begin, so let me start there. And
hmm,
so that's what I did, is I started to focus on drawing the figure, and I started getting better and better and better at drawing the figure. But it was this process of maintaining that educational stride. I wasn't going to just stop learning just because I was a professional.
exactly.
And one of the people that was there is an artist by the name of Dan Guzet, a very famous illustrator. So this is somebody that that when I was going to art school, I had lionized her, and I thought, like, well, this is sort of the apex of like where I want to be. And here we were drawing the figure together, and he was much older than I was. He's probably 20, 30 years older than me. And I remember he had painted a quick we had a model that it's had set up, and it was in that particular session it was painting, and he painted this little tiny portrait. I guess it was about like this big, and of the model, and it looked like a Sorolla. It was beautiful, but his style was very quick. He usually would bring like illustration board, and he would paint with this acrylic, and it was sort of like a mix of drawing and painting. And then on this session, he brought his oils, and he painted like Sorolla. Well, and I remember I was stunned, and I said, "Wow, you're a master." Here that you can paint in these multiple styles. Oh, and he said, like, "Oh, I'm setting my palette up the way Anders Zorn would set it up." And so I told him, I said, "You're a master at this." And he said, "No," he says, "I'm just a student like you. It's just that some students are older than others." And I thought, you know what? It was one of those, like, every now and then you get a moment and somebody creates some clarity for you. So I took that and I put that in my pocket, and I've carried it ever since. I don't think that, being a student means that that those desires to learn go away when you're
Yeah.
older.
Yeah, that is a really interesting way to think about it. So, that is something going into the next question, relating to question two. It kind of relates to it, but also not really. You've talked about it. You've talked that about how you had to transition really quickly from 2D to 3D. Uh, you've worked on many different like modern tech stuff, and you're still pretty good with a 2D stuff something modern technology and character design. What do you have to do to retool your art style to fit within certain films? Because you mentioned you've worked with Sony, and they probably have some of my favorite character designs. And you've worked on a lot. I just love the angular art style a lot. You've worked on Open Season, like you said, Surf's Up, and something you didn't mention, you worked on Vivo. On the IMDb, it says that, and that also has like a very pleasing art style. What do you have to? And even also with your recent film, Gabby's Dollhouse, you had to like look at the Netflix show. I saw your Lightbox thing, your DreamWorks Lightbox production management thing, and you talked about how you had to fit within the parameters of live action and try to make sure they look like the Netflix characters, but with a little sheen to it. So it's like,
Yeah.
what do you do within certain films you've worked on to have it look tonally, artistically, and they all to look different through style, feel, and aesthetic?
Well, that's it. Is like every show that you're going to work on, it has. I think we probably need to back up a little bit and talk about, well,
Yeah, yeah. Talk
what
it
is a
to
movie?
go back. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is a movie?
You asking me?
Yeah. What is a movie?
For me, a movie is a experience where you see a different world with different characters, settings, and a unique theme.
Yeah. And so when you boil it down, it's a story. A movie is a story. You can be told verbally a story. You can watch a puppet show. it can be animation, it can be a movie. These are stories. And so, what a story is, it has to have a point. And so, as an artist, the most important thing is to figure out what is that story about? What is the point? And then drive at like, what is the best way to communicate that story? And that's why I've tried to focus as a professional, focus on uh, the aspect of communication.
Right.
So, like, let's say with Gabbys Dollhouse, I had an opportunity to work on that one, and I'd never worked on a live action hybrid. So you've got it's kind of like a Stuart Little, where
Yeah.
you've got live action characters, and then these other characters that are animated that fit into this world. And I'd never done that before, and I thought this is a fantastic opportunity to do that. So what and I'll just walk you through the process, which was very different. When I came on board, they had done some development on it, but they were going a different direction. But when I came on board, I looked at the property and I said, well, what is it that the story's trying to communicate? Who is Gabby? Well, Gabby's a girl that, she goes into the dollhouse. That's it. So she's going into the dollhouse. Is she really going into the dollhouse?
I
Or
oh,
or
sorry.
is this a metaphor for her using her imagination playing
Yeah.
and going into the dollhouse with her imagination? So I thought, okay, let's stick with that idea. This is a child, and what you see, because you can see the movie as it is, right? So a kid will watch the movie, she goes into the dollhouse.
Right.
But what does that represent? And this story, it represents her going into her imagination to go into the dollhouse to play with her dollhouse friends. So with that focus, then it was okay. So when she goes into this world, how do we represent the transition, that portal, as she goes into her imagination to go into the world? And then once we're in this world, how do we represent that world? And so it was like, okay, so a hyper, scale to textures, hyper detail, shallow depth of field. So there was all these decisions that already came pre-made with this idea.
Mm-hmm.
Once you uh, once you go into a story and approach it from the purpose of honesty, the story is going to tell you what it needs. You don't go in there and say like, oh, I'm just going to put this particular style on it. No, the story wants to be told in a way. And once we figured out what the vehicle was, that this is the vehicle for Gabby's imagination, then a lot of the decisions were already made. And it simply became a question of what's the best way to communicate that. And so I carry that with me. So every single project that I work on, and that's why all the projects are pretty unique. I also think I've had a longevity in my career
Yeah.
because I started in 2D animation or 2D animation,
Yeah.
and then that studio collapsed. And then I went over to work in animation when it was 2D feature animation, and we rode that all the way up until it collapsed. And then it became the CG animation over at Sony, and I
Mm-hmm.
rode that for quite a while. And so like there's every time that there's these obstacles that happen, it forces you to re-engage at a different level. And I think that my longevity has come from the fact that I also do that with each individual project. It's not like I just run through all the projects with the same template. I approach each project in a very unique way, and I try to figure out what each project needs. And so for me, when the industry would collapse and then rebuild, or I ended up at a different studio, it wasn't as traumatic for me because it was almost like every project for me was like that. Every project had its own unique way of wanting to be told, and I had to discover that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. It's like once you get onto something, it's like, oh, so this is the story. These are the characters. What can we do with that? Oh, here's a theme. Perfect. Let's follow that. That is a really good way of generalizing problem solving within this industry. I don't want to be a bit of a rushy rush, but we only have about like 20-ish minutes, so I'm gonna
Okay.
try and ask a few more questions and try to be
Sure.
quick with some of them. So yeah, going back to your freelance history, you are a freelancer now, and you've talked
Yes.
about it, working with studios before with like Disney and Sony for a long time. Are there any benefits to it? Are there any disadvantages? Something you've missed about it? But you still are working with the industry clearly with like DreamWorks and whatnot. So like, what are some big differences for you at
Well,
least?
the when we were working at DIC, it was wonderful because um, there was a certain camaraderie that was at the studio that we weren't just working on shows. We were we were friends that were sort of sharing at this moment in our lives, and we were building things together. And it was so much fun to think of it like that. I've always tried to keep that. And sometimes I remember when I was leaving Sony, and I'd been there for like 16 years, and somebody was saying, like, and you're going to Disney. What if it doesn't work out? What if you go over there and who knows, something, it doesn't work out. And then you left this. And I told him, I said, you know what? It'll be okay because wherever I go, I'm going to be making cartoons with my friends.
Aww.
And and I think it's a great way to look at it, which is that try to find the people that you want to be a part of. Try to, uh, find friends in the industry that and people that you think that can elevate you, that can help you become a better version of yourself, and strive at that. Don't focus so much on, oh, I got to work at this studio, Pixar. It's Pixar or nothing, right? Or I got to work at Disney. It's
It's
not
all about
about
the
that.
connections, man.
It really is about the connection. I know it sounds corny, and some people, they're going to hear this and they're going to disregard it, but I do think that if you're if you want to have longevity, find the people that you want to be a part of, find the groups that you want to be a part of, and go make something with them.
Right.
Because I think you're going to have a lot of fun working with your friends.
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand that. And like being at Lightbox last year definitely taught me that. It's like I've met a lot of people that are already in the industry, but like meeting the students and meeting the people like me and people complimenting my art, it really like lifted my spirits. It's like people actually like my art. So it's like it definitely is a big important factor of it, of like just doing it for the love of the game and doing it with supporting your friends. That is a really good way of putting it. And you kind of got into it about some advice, but any other advice you would give like artists like you or creatives or people that are just ready to do something creative in live
Well,
action, animation, art, whatever?
yeah, I think that there's like a big concern in the industry with AI.
Yes,
and
yes, yeah.
and that's the elephant in the room, and I want to try and address that. The
Please do.
when you when you look at, like I said, with when I started in animation was 2D, that traditional animation, or the animation studios that were doing the Flintstones and the Hanna-Barbera cartoons, all of that went away. All of those jobs went away, and then they ended up farming that overseas. That's where I came in. So I came in once the industry had collapsed, and then we came back and started to build something from the ashes of what used to be the industry, and then we started to build something up. Then that turned into, a lot of guys ended up going into feature animation over at Disney, guys like Paul Felix, myself. Then also it ended up going into Warner Brothers with Batman. So you have this from what had collapsed, this other thing had sprung up from that, and then we rode that all the way up until like 2001 when 2D animation collapsed. And so when that happened and the whole thing sort of the industry just sort of flattened out. Then it rebuilt with CG animation.
Right.
So this idea of that animation has to be static. It can only work if it's a static industry. It's not going to be static. Life isn't static. And unfortunately, I wish it would have lasted a little longer.
Yeah.
Like the 2D, it was a lot of fun. Wish it would have lasted a little longer. But the fact that it transitions. I've been able to take all my experience that I picked up at DIC and that I picked up at Disney when it was 2D. All of those things I took with me when I went to go work at Sony, because it's knowledge, it's insight, it's information that I
Yeah,
was carrying with me. It's not like all of that went away. And then so when I look at something like AI that's coming up, AI is going to be it's going to have a profound impact on the industry. Um,
absolutely.
and I
Absolutely.
think it's going to break up the studios. I really do believe that. But I think that what that does is it's going to put a lot of power in your hands. And for when you build relationships with your friends, you'll be able you'll be able to do the things that only studios could do 10 years ago. And you'll be able to do them with a small group of people using AI. Excuse me. When you look at I had gotten an iPad and it has an animation program on it.
Yeah.
So it was Procreate,
Yeah,
and so
Procreate.
I started animating on it, and it was something stupid. It was like it was my cat, a cartoon of my cat, and she eats her fluff, and so I drew this out, and we have to whenever her fluff is on the ground, we got to pick it up because she eats it, and but she's fluffy like cotton candy. So I thought like, oh, she must think that she's delicious. So I did this cartoon of her grabbing fluff off of her and eating it. And it was just a funny gag, and I'm drawing this thing. But when I was drawing that, I was thinking, wow, the complexity of being able to do this would have been impossible when I was going to art school. We had to draw everything on paper. Then we had to go and have it photographed sequentially. Then we had to go get that film developed. And then we had to create stats of that. And you had to flip them over. You had to paint the back. Then you had to reshoot the whole thing all over again. So it was so complex. And then you had to put a background on it. You had to register it. You had to have a table where you could move a background on it if you had a background that moved on it, and the whole thing was set up for. And then you had to have it color balanced. There's unbelievable amount of work, and that's not even counting the audio. I think I put like a silly audio or something on it, but the that pro that iPad with Procreate on it was like an entire studio in just in just one, this little thing that was no bigger than a board. And so that as technology develops, I think some people, wax longingly for an era of the past when things were drawn by hand. And I'm not going to say that it wasn't fun. It was a tremendous amount of fun,
Right.
but nothing is static in life. And so as these things move on, we're all going to have to adapt. And so I don't think it's a negative thing. It's negative if you wanted everything to stay the same, but it's positive in the sense that if you build partnerships with your friends and you guys go and try to build some of these things on your own together, you guys have much more opportunities, using technology to do what studios would have been able to do a few decades ago. So I would just tell everyone not to be afraid of it, and to, you know, yeah, just
Yeah.
continue moving forward. Do it with your friends. Tell stories. Got to tell stories worth telling, but tell stories with your friends.
Yeah, that's some really good advice. Real I usually like to end with a fun little quick question.
Okay.
So make this a short one. How'd you get a magnificent beard like that?
It's funny. Look, it's just genetic, right? But now that I've grown my mustache, because I usually kept my mustache really trim and my goatee really trim,
Yeah.
and then I started just letting it grow, and it got really big and thick, and it's kind of dark. So it, this is all natural. I don't dye my mustache or anything. Here it's kind of gray, but look, I mean, it's one heck of a mustache, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
it's great. It's one of my favorite attributes besides your history.
well, thanks.
Marcelo, not Marcelo. Yeah, Marcelo. Where can people find you?
I have a little cartoon series called Suburban Slaughter. It's like suburban underscore slaughter. That's on Instagram, or you can find me by my name, Marcelo Vignali. You can find me. I think that's pretty much it. And then you can find me also on LinkedIn if you want to send me a message. I also have a website that it's Vignali Studio. vignalistudio.com. Yeah, so, and I try to be very open with what I know. One of the things I found really helpful was when professionals would open up to me and answer my questions. And so
Right.
I thought I need to pay that forward. So, um, what I give to you freely, I hope that you'll also do the same and pay it forward. So,
Of course, Marcel. I will definitely do that. This is kind of what that podcast, having people on this podcast is all about. And once again, everybody, and thank you for listening. And Marcelo, thank you for your time. It's been a
sure,
pleasure.
I really appreciate that. Thanks, Declan.
Of
Right.
course. And thank you for everyone for tuning into our animated lives. Thank you.